How do we combat evil in our world? Welcome to Kingdom of the Logos, a Christian program of critical thinking and adventure. I'm Pastor J. Dylan Proctor, and you can follow me on Twitter at J. Dylan Proctor. I'm not alone here in the studio. Joining me is Anthony Allegria.
Yes, and just to pick up a cool niche thing to do, I'm going to do the watch check. I'm wearing the Timex Expedition chronograph with an Army Green NATO strap.
Yes, and also with us is co-host Pastor Amanda Sparrow.
I'm so glad you explained what a watch check is. I was like, what in the world are we doing here? Okay, but yes, so we're here.
Yes, and I don't know what a watch check either, though I do have a watch on. I wear the little Lego watches. They're sort of niche. You can pick them up in bulk for a few dollars on eBay, and they're really cool and surprisingly heavy duty. Not anything of the class of what Anthony wears, but anyways, Amanda, what are we going to be talking about today as we discuss combating evil?
All right, so this is podcast 64. And also remember to like us on Facebook and subscribe to Kingdom of the Logos on YouTube. So in this program, we're going to talk about combating evil and how the League of Nations is coming together around rosaries. And I know, like, you hear the title League of Nations, and it sounds a little bit like an evil kind of villain collaboration, but it's not. It's not from a comic book. It's a real place, a real thing, and it actually is doing some great good. So stay tuned for that. We're also going to be building on our conversation about Sebastian. That is a saint we've referred to in previous episodes. He's a Christian from the 3rd century that went to great lengths to fight evil in the world around him.
Yes, and thanks for joining us. It helps us out greatly when you share our content. I know there's a lot of you out here who watch here locally in the Tennessee area. Please just share our content, grabbing a link and sharing it with your friends and family will do so much. And if you really like us, send us a comment. Send us your questions. We have one today that we're going to be answering in the very end of our program. This is 64A. That answer will be in 64B, so you'll have to hang around for that. But if you would like to donate monetarily, you can do that at patreon.com/Kingdom of the Logos. So Amanda's already introduced what we're going to be talking about is the theme of combating evil. But in the essence of staying lighthearted, let's open up today with a few articles that are fun. One is about a crow, which is employed by a theme park. And I'm going to let Amanda give an overview of this to us.
All right, so this is coming from the articles coming from sky.com, Sky News. So basically, the kind of a synopsis of the article is that a theme park in France, and I'm going to try to pronounce it, but I do not speak French, so I apologize. But it's Puy de Faux, we think, is a park. It is a historical theme park, very popular in France. And they have started training crows to pick up cigarette butts and various trash in the park. And one of the president of the park says that the goal is not to clear up, because visitors do that generally, but it is to help show people that even nature itself wants to inspire people to keep clean. So that's just kind of the synopsis of the article.
Yeah, and you get the crow there. A lot, again, people that have no doubt. Last week, or maybe it was week before last week, we're talking about a man who stole a shark using a baby stroller. I'm sure there's some animal rights activist that's going to be like, oh no, they can't employ crows. But I actually think it's pretty cool. I would put this in the category of hot if we were playing Hot, Not or Sanctified. They have employed crows to help clean up in the theme park. However, I probably should not go there because I have a habit of destroying birds of size and stature. Even today, as I was driving over to the church, I hit a buzzard with my car. It hit right on the A-pillar and exploded, and blood and guts went all over the car. It was very theatrical.
Just couldn't help himself.
Couldn't help myself. But a few months ago, the vehicle I drive is a Mini Clubman. I hit a turkey in the windshield, and it just exploded everywhere. Today I was trying to avoid that. So I guess that is not a theme park for me, because I'll take out some of their employees, and that's not one of the things that needs to be on your resume.
Do you think crows get workers' comp if they get hit by cars? Yeah, well, they do get fed. So every time they pick up trash, they get food and they get treats. So they are being treated well. If that helps.
Yeah, and that is really cool. Again, crows are really intelligent. They're actually some of the most intelligent birds. I think when they've done scores on birds, the crows have actually ranked the highest of all birds in intelligence. And I know they're capable of facial recognition. If you clip their tongue right, they can speak. And evidently, if you pay them in treats, you can get them to work for you. Anthony, do you have anything to say about that?
I will say, back to the workers' comp thing, historically speaking, there are a ton of working animals who, like, once they've kind of, hit the being let out into the pasture field, have actually gotten to live pretty great lives as a result of that work, which is really interesting.
Yeah, even in Hollywood, this is one of the things, I know there's been a lot of scandals, and I know everybody wants relief from culture, but in Hollywood, most animals have better contracts negotiated than do like children. Like the animals can only work for like a few minutes before they have to be given a treat. They have to be given like a break and stuff like that. It's crazy. Anyways, I was actually asking if Anthony had any comment because I may replace Anthony with a well-trained crow.
There you go.
There we go.
So down there, you have to train it to peck the right buttons in the right
Yes,
order.
it has to pick the right buttons. Just kidding, Anthony. You're not going anywhere. We have you forever. All right, so the
Scary.
next thing we have to talk about is holy water that was contaminated. And this is an interesting one, which just sort of sheds light on the ambiguous and general turmoil that we find throughout creation.
Right. And so this also takes place in France. This article is from thesun.co.uk, and it's about the Notre Dame. So congregants were going to the Notre Dame, and if you're familiar with Catholic tradition, they usually dip their fingers in a font, which is just a basin of water, of holy water, and then they cross themselves. Well, when this happened, apparently some people started to complain that their faces were tingling and they were getting headaches, and also some other people were complaining that there was a foul smell coming from the holy water. So the priest or whoever was in charge called the authorities because they were afraid the water was poisoned. The authorities did investigate and they didn't find any reason to believe that there was any kind of concern. And the article is really kind of ambiguous. Does that mean like they didn't find something high enough to cause a concern, or did they not find anything in the water? It really doesn't say. But regardless, this is kind of, some people were very worried that this was the beginnings of a terrorist attack. But like I said, authorities couldn't find anything much more significant than the tingly faces and the headaches.
Yeah, so it's interesting. Again, a little bit of a metaphor of things going on in the world. There always are times in life where things which are intended for holy purposes, contamination can come. Evil creeps in and it wants to destroy, it wants to be ambiguous, and it wants to come in and move the world not towards something better. It doesn't want to move the world towards reason, but it wants to take creation back to its pre-created state of this nihilistic void of nothingness. And today we're going to be talking about evil. I know we had some interesting articles there at the beginning, but using this one on holy water, I want to segue and transition into a conversation about evil and how do we deal with this. So at the start of this conversation, I want to make a very important statement, and bear with me on this, because I know a lot of people think it's important to have good intentions, but yet we have phrases like the road to hell is paved with good intentions. But there's an important distinction that I want to make. Good intentions are not enough in a world where there are evil people and evil forces at play. Good intentions are great, but they're not enough. One needs a strong moral compass telling them right from wrong more than we need good intentions. Because good intentions are something which is downstream. They are derived from our moral code. If we have a bad moral code, we may have good intentions, but our actions are going to turn out a different way than something actually good. This is especially true in a world that loves my truth and moral relativism. We live in a world where a lot of people follow what is basically the religion of Oprah. They want to have my truth, go out and live your truth. The problem is that if everyone thinks their personal truth has as much authority as every other truth in the world, then good intentions are nothing more than words of consolation in the face of evil. If we don't actually have something transcendental that originates outside of ourselves helping us towards good, good intentions are not going to mean anything. If they only start from inside ourselves, then there's a big problem. When we look throughout history, we can look at some people who are obviously very bad, but yet when we examine their character and the motives behind them, we can see just how dangerous good intentions are when they originate out of bad moral codes. Stalin, he had his truth of the good intentions of battling class warfare. You know, it sounds good to battle class warfare. When you talk about the bourgeoisie having its rule over the proletariat, those people, they want to hoard up all the resources. All of that is very compelling. But when we examine history honestly, Stalin killed tens of millions of people, or his ideology and what went on in Soviet Russia killed tens of millions of people. And we can't even figure out how many tens of millions of people were killed as a result of this, because the morality behind those intentions was corrupt. Good intentions can still cause evil if the morality behind them is evil. Nazi Germany, it had its truth of eugenics, and it was considered merciful within that ideology to kill Jews because they were inherently diseased. The truth that they had, their good intentions of eradicating people of disease, was ultimately evil. In our world where social media mobs and social media movements have such extreme power, we must realize that good intentions are not enough. We are often tricked by the fact that movements start and they have a name associated with them, and we like the intent of movements. We like the hashtags and things which come in our world. But we have to step back and say, is the motives behind this and the morals of the people leading these movements capable of actually moving us towards a better place? Because we may find that we like the intent of a movement, but if we blind ourselves to the morality behind such intent, we may find ourselves deficient in the end. This is the problem I have with a lot of the social media mobs, because they're really easy to get into and there's no moral authority needed to get into them. People can just get online, they can write something out, they can do something, whether it be cyberbullying, or they can think they're standing up for victims, but they have no idea whether they're actually helping people or not because they don't actually have a good moral compass guiding them. There's no accountability, there's no real justice, only qualified justice. History has taught us over thousands of years that justice is best served blind. It is best served by an objective moral code which has transcendental authority over the people that are being examined. Justice is best served when it comes from something outside of the parties involved. But in our modern world, we find that many people hate this. They claim there are injustice in the world and they want to do something about that, and I do believe they have legitimate intentions to do something about this. However, instead of taking up the wisdom that justice needs to be more blind, they instead want to align justice with their personal and relative truth. And ultimately, when we look at history, that destroys civilizations. A great philosophy I have learned here recently in life is that when dealing with morality and when dealing with the theological questions we have in the world, take this wisdom. Stake your flag in strong, orthodox morality. Do not stake your flag in gray area. If you stake your flag on solid morality, you will take that solid morality with you to the areas of gray in life. However, if you stake your flag in the gray areas in life, you will carry gray to where there are areas of no gray. In other words, if you start thinking about the outliers and the exceptions and say, oh, well, there's moral gray area here, you'll start taking that moral gray area to places where, well, we can actually clearly tell the difference between good and bad. But if you start your thinking and say, what does it mean to be Christ-like? What does it mean to have the very will of God come and inspire me and teach me every day? If we start thinking on the solid ground of tradition, evidence, and orthodoxy, then we will be well prepared to deal with the unusual circumstances of life. So, before we read about this League of Nations and what they're doing with the Rosary, I just wanted to throw this over to Amanda and see if you have any thoughts on that monologue I just shared there before we move along.
Well, I think as you were talking, I was reminded of the story early on in Acts where I think it was Peter and John are taken before the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin is upset at them because they keep proclaiming this message of Christ and Jesus, Christ Jesus being resurrected. And so they remove Peter and John from their presence, and they're talking within themselves. And one of the leaders stands up, and he's regarded for his wisdom. And he says, remember a couple years ago, there's someone came up and they tried to revolt. He died and his disciples ran away. And then this other guy came up and he tried to start a revolt. And again, he died and his followers ran away. Now there's this group following this Jesus of Nazareth. He said, if it's not from God, it's going to dissipate. And we can see that in the movements and the social movements today. Yes, in our world, there are some awful things going on. And yes, there are movements out there that are trying to combat the evils of our world. So by no means are we trying to say that these movements themselves are evil or unnecessary. But they seem to lack a solid foundation, so they can only do so much. And so then the great leader in the Sanhedrin concludes with, if these disciples, though, are of God, you will find yourself fighting against God, and you will find yourself on the wrong side. And so this is the difference. This is where we're trying to move, right? It's saying good movement, secular people who are trying to do good things, they're not inherently evil. They're not like the evil around them, but they're not going to make the difference in the world that they could make, that can be made. And actually, sometimes they can actually be roped in to evil things because they don't have a solid foundation. And what is that solid foundation? What does that have to be if it's going to be successful in the world of actually changing hearts and minds, not just changing policies? It's going to only happen if that foundation is Christ.
Couldn't have stated it better myself. So let's go into this with the Holy League of Nations. Amanda, if you would share with us a little bit about this.
All right, so again, Holy League of Nations, it sounds creepy, and actually the website is from thechurchmilitant.com, and if you're like me, I saw all those words and was like, woo, red flags. But this is, again, actually a very great group that is moving towards a place of organizing people, kind of like think of prayer at the pole or prayer day that happens in schools, but this is establishing it on a much broader scale, and it is using the infrastructure of the Catholic Church. And so they are calling like this, it's a rosary day. And if you're unfamiliar with what a rosary is, it's a necklace, or sometimes they wear it like a bracelet around their arms, and it has beads on it. And you follow the beads to help you remember how to pray. You usually do Our Fathers and Hail Marys and things like that. And then you conclude with a big prayer. But anyways, it's a tool to be used to help you to go through a time of prayer and reflection. And so they're using this Rosary Day to call people to prayer, and it's happening internationally. That's why it's called a League of Nations. It started in Poland, and then this helped influence some other things where people actually gathered around the borders of Poland to pray for the country as a whole. And if you can just think, I mean, Poland's not a giant country, but it's a good-sized country, and to get people to just in fields and also along the coast and other places to pray for their country. And this then eventually led to some other things where they had a service where they crowned Christ King of Poland, which is phenomenal in our world. And I think we're going to talk about that a little bit later in our program. But this is what the Holy League of Nations is talking about.
Yeah, and stick around for episode 64B, where we're going to talk about that. I know for time purposes, we're trying not to take too much of your time, but we do appreciate you joining us. We're going to talk about, is it hot, not or sanctified to crown Christ King as a nation here in the modern world? There's a lot of people who say government and politics don't need to mesh, but I think there's something powerful in that. We'll talk about that. But let's go back to the rosary a bit. I know a lot of people, they say, well, how do we defeat evil? And does a nation getting really excited about prayer, does that do anything? Well, one of the things that the rosary was designed for, and the rosary is really actually a prayer. I don't want to get too much into the Catholicism of it. A lot of people look at you and say, oh, look at y'all over there wearing your clergy college, talking about rosaries. Y'all just want to be Catholics. Look, there's issues with that. We are Church of the Nazarene proudly. We're very proud Wesleyan holiness people. But the actual history of what these are, and if anybody that's in our audience would actually like one, we make some. We're actually thinking about having these as something that we send to people who subscribe and support the program. The rosary starts off as prayer beads, and it begins in what is early Christian church, a little bit before Catholicism is Catholicism, sort of the general church that exists early on. And when people would be converted into the faith, they wanted the people who couldn't read and write, the people who may have been Gentiles by birth, to have something on their body to remind them, everywhere you go, God is king in your life. In other words, you don't go be a pagan on every other day of the week when you're not at church. You don't go to the next temple. When you're going out, you're working in the fields. When you're going home, you are a Christian, and you should be thinking about that. So they made these beads that they could give people, and you would wear it on you. Maybe you'd have it in a pocket or a bag or something. And whenever your hands come across that, you'd be reminded, oh, I'm a Christian. God is the king of my life. I don't need to be thinking about the pagans in the world, but Jesus is my Savior. And when you would have those, you would take and you would run your hand around the beads, and it would take a little bit of time to do a prayer where you go from bead to bead to bead. And yes, it's involved into the modern form where there's Hail Marys and stuff in there. I think, again, there's some serious issues with that. However, I can respect its function as saying something that you keep on your person, you feel it, and you're reminded, oh, I need to be spending time in prayer, and you've got to spend a little bit of time to go around that. So send us your thoughts on that. Right now, we're going to go out to our resident anchorite, Athanasius, and we're going to see what he has to say about St. Sebastian, and then we'll come back to talk about Sebastian.
Welcome, and thank you for joining us outside. We're here with our resident anchorite, Athanasius. Hey, how are you doing? It's been a while since we've seen you. Oh, okay, interesting. I guess not much goes on in the life of an anchorite. But anyways, Athanasius, I think you have a scroll for us. We're wanting to learn a little bit more about Sebastian. Do you have anything for us? No, I think you had something for us. Oh, okay, there it is. Thank you. Ooh, it's on a pretty purple. Thank you so much, Athanasius, and we'll continue to learn about Sebastian and talk with you more. Thank you. How do we deal with evil in our world? This question is especially difficult when evil is not perpetrated by obvious villains, but instead by cultures built on unrighteous morality. Sebastian was a young man living in the 3rd century in Rome, a culture of mobs that used the power of the state to brutally torture and execute Christians. The Roman culture would entertain itself with the suffering of the church and justify its evil with unreasonable allegations against the followers of Christ. Sebastian was not just any youth, he was a Christian convicted to combat the evil in the world around him. Sebastian's response to Rome might surprise you. In order to combat the evils of Rome, he joined the Roman army. As a Roman soldier, he could work undercover to assist Christians being persecuted by the Roman government. Sebastian had a success in both his undercover work and as a Roman soldier. Moreover, as a soldier, he became a favorite of Emperor Diocletian and became a member of the Emperor's Praetorian Guard, an elite unit that served as bodyguards for the Emperor. As part of the Praetorian Guard, Sebastian had access to many elites in society and was able to minister to many, teaching them the gospel of Christ. Furthermore, Sebastian's status granted him reliable information about those arrested for their faith. This information allowed him to minister to the families of the suffering. For a while, Sebastian was able to minister in secret, leading many people to Christ. However, after converting a local prefect, Sebastian was reported to Emperor Diocletian in 286. With Sebastian revealed as a Christian, the emperor ordered Sebastian to be used as target practice by archers. Sebastian was tied to a stake in a practice field, and he was shot so many times by archers that his body was described as being as full of arrows as an urchin. After being used for target practice, he was left for dead. A Christian widow named Irene, also known as Saint Irene of Rome, came to retrieve Sebastian's body. Irene's husband had also been a Christian serving in the Roman military, though he had been martyred for his faith. As Irene was taking Sebastian's body down from the stake, she discovered that he was still alive, so she took him home and nursed him back to health. 2 years later, and after recovering his health, Sebastian took it upon himself to confront the emperor personally. He had been a favorite of Emperor Diocletian prior to being discovered as a Christian. Utilizing a stairway, Sebastian positioned himself to surprise and confront Diocletian for his brutal persecution of Christians. When he emerged, the emperor was shocked that Sebastian was alive. However, he was not moved by Sebastian's appeal, and after regaining his composure, Emperor Diocletian ordered the execution of Sebastian for a second time. This time, clubs were used to beat Sebastian to death, and his body was thrown into a sewer. The year was 288. A Christian named Lucina recovered his body, and she took it deep within the catacombs beneath Rome to bury it.
Sebastian really is an interesting person from church history. As we go back and we look at his history, we see that he really wanted to combat the evil of the world, and he did this with personal responsibility. I myself am going to go out on a limb, again, taking a huge risk that ultimately led to his execution twice, though only successfully the second time around. And there really is some inspiration we can take from that. Amanda, what are your thoughts? I know you had read through and shared with us the story of St. Sebastian. What do you think about this level of combating evil and the moral code it takes to be able to do something like this?
Well, I had heard the story of Sebastian before, but I think either I remembered it wrong, or maybe I had heard just one of the stories around him where he goes back a second time, and it was like he just kind of goes back to like a random in the story I had heard, or that I remember, he goes back kind of just like to a random Roman leader. Like it just seems like, there's a Roman person I can go yell at. But in this story and this telling of it, it does. There's this intentionality of not just going to some Roman leader, but the emperor. You had to really think that, he really had to think that through of, I'm not just going to confront somebody, I'm going to confront the emperor who is leading this and who tried to kill me 2 years ago. And not only am I just going to show up, I'm going to hide in his pathway so I know for sure I can talk to him about it. The level of commitment there is so phenomenal because, again, he had to have known he's not getting out of there alive. There was a slim chance Diocletian would be like, you know what, you're right. I'm going to stop persecuting Christians.
Diocletian is known for being pretty nasty historically. He definitely does a lot of killing of Christians. And a lot of times people in our world, they talk about oppression, and it's always some sort of soft oppression that you can't really prove or disprove. In this case, it was brutal torturing of people for entertainment. They would do horrific things to people in the amphitheater. And just amazing stories of integrity that Christians would have when they were said, make the pagan sacrifice or go to the amphitheater. crazy levels of faith that these people had. But as we look at Sebastian, he actually knew Diocletian personally. He was part of the Praetorian Guard, which means he was one of the elite bodyguards to the emperor. So it wasn't like it was some random Roman he was going back to. It was actually someone that he knew quite well. He would have actually had to have some sort of favor with Diocletian to even be in the Praetorian Guard. So when Diocletian has him killed the first time, it's sort of out of rage of this person who I've had so close to me. He goes out and he's been converting Christians, and that's ultimately how Sebastian gets found out, is he's converting a prefect who is high up in Rome, and word gets around to the emperor that Sebastian's this Christian who's been working underground right next to the emperor's nose. Literally, he's the bodyguard of the emperor. And he sends him out to be target practice. When Sebastian goes back, it's not just like somebody who's wanting to go do a stand on the street protest. It's actually somebody who personally knew the emperor going back to confront him over the evil that he's carrying out. And there is something pretty awesome about that, because Amanda's right. He got killed the first time he was doing this, just unsuccessfully, and the second time he would have had to know this would be his end. Anyways, we'll end it there. Thank you for watching. Again, if you would like to do anything for us, send us your questions, comments, share our content. That will help us out tremendously. Check out our YouTube channel. It's a lot easier to look up videos there, and that's Kingdom of the Logos there on YouTube. And subscribe and click the little bell, and it'll help us out a lot. Anyways, thanks for joining us, and have a blessed day.